All right, hey everybody. So we are going to move into a new unit. We're going to talk about the digestive system, and we'll spend at least a couple weeks on that. I got a couple activities that we'll modify and make sure that you can do online. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this PowerPoint, and then I'll have a set of questions for you to do on Canvas as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the dive reflex videos. I did just make an adjustment to that so that you can upload the video for that as well. Sorry about that. I didn't have the media recording box checked, so that is there now. A couple of you had emailed your videos, and that works too. So you can go ahead and finish that up. It sounds like it's working. So for the digestive system, we have two main groups that we can break the digestive system up into. We have what's called the alimentary canal, and all the alimentary canal is just that's the passageway, that's the digestive tract. It's the same thing. So that would be from mouth to anus. And then you have a series of accessory organs, and your accessory organs are going to be things like the pancreas, the liver, your salivary glands, those organs pumping material into the tube, okay? So you've got your tube, and then you've got stuff coming into the tube, being pumped in at various spots into the tube to help you break down the foods and then ultimately absorb those nutrients. So the alimentary canal, or the gastrointestinal tract, that's going to be the tube that's open on both ends. It's open to the exterior on both sides, mouth and anus. It is muscular from superior to inferior. It helps propel food along the way. This was a joke that if you know anything about Watson and Sherlock Holmes, that maybe you'll find this humorous. I pulled this a long time ago, so enjoy the read there. If you don't know his famous saying, then you're not going to get it. On the next slide, we're looking at parts of the mouth. Okay, so it says includes teeth, oral cavity, tongue, hard and soft palate. We've already talked about congenital disorders in some respect with the respiratory tract. Because a cleft palate affects breathing and it affects digestion, then we have to include it in both systems. So remember, if you've forgotten, a cleft palate is when the maxilla or it could include also the palatine bone. If the palate is not completely fused medially during development, then you're left with a space. You're left with a gap that may include the lip. It may include just the bone. It could be both. But what it does is it opens up your respiratory and your digestive tract, because the palate separates your oral from your nasal cavity. So if you're trying to eat foods and speak, not having a space there, having an opening, is going to make that difficult, because you're going to have food that may go up into the nasal cavity. You're going to have air that's supposed to go through the nasal cavity down the pharynx, and instead some of it's going to whistle and pass through into the oral cavity, so it creates a lot of problems. The other one here, tongue-tied. Tongue-tied is when you have a tongue that's just a little bit short. It may make it more difficult to speak and move food around the mouth. That can be treated, and someone, if we had done a poll in class, probably somebody would have either had it done themselves or known someone. It usually comes up that people know folks that have had their frenulum cut. So the frenulum, if you lift your tongue up, that is going to be that little thing in the middle that's holding the tongue to the floor of the mouth. And to extend the tongue out further, you can cut the frenulum, and that can solve the problem with being what they call tongue-tied. Gene Simmons, who is one of the guitarists and singers of the group Kiss from the 70s. You guys probably still know who they are. They're the ones who paint their face. If you Google him, you can see how long his tongue is, and apparently he had his frenulum cut just for that reason. Tonsils. We talked about the tonsils already. I'm not going to go through this in a huge amount of detail. You remember the palatine, the lingual, which is the back of the tongue. The palatine's at the back of the throat. Those are the ones that you can see when you open your mouth. The pharyngeal tonsils, or the adenoids, are the ones that are in the back of the nasal cavity, and they're all made up of lymphatic tissue to help remove bacteria and prevent infection. All right, so continuing with the mouth, the first part of digestion is going to occur immediately in the mouth, and that's with chewing, or what's called mastication. Mixing the food up with saliva. So if we ask you, where does mechanical and chemical digestion begin? Both of those events start in the mouth. As soon as you start chewing food, that's called mastication. That begins the physical breakup of material. The mixing of saliva begins the chemical breakdown, where sugars are formed from more complex carbohydrates. So if you take a cracker and put it in your mouth, let it soak there for a period of time, and it should start to taste sweet because you're breaking down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars, and you're going to have that sweet taste in your mouth. So the chemical breakdown starts right away with the saliva. It's called salivary amylase. Here, I can write that on here. I know it's on one of the other slides. Oops. You guys know my handwriting's terrible. So salivary amylase is the enzyme that's going to help break down carbohydrates in your mouth. The papillae, that is not a term that is unique to the mouth. We've seen papillary before. If you remember, it was the upper portions of the skin in the dermis. They pushed up into the epidermis to create our fingerprints. We called that the papillary layer. We also had papillary muscles in the heart, and those are the ones that attach to the chordae tendineae to keep the valves from blowing into the atria. So this is just another extension, little bumps, little extensions on your tongue that our nerve endings are present to allow you to taste and enjoy food while digesting. If you want, you can Google. I had slides here, but you can just Google this. If you want to look at disorders, mouth disorders, you can Google those. Enjoy. There are some that are very disgusting. You can see what's happened to people who have been chewing tobacco for years, and some of the pictures of cancer that they've developed, tumors that they've developed. There are a huge variety of mouth disorders that you can check out. So read through those, have fun with that, and you can view those at your leisure. There are 3 parts. We've talked about this too. The pharynx. Remember, the pharynx is part of the digestive and the respiratory tract. It's a shared food, water, and air passageway. It's only when the epiglottis closes and flips that we shunt food down into the stomach, and when it's open, we can take air into the lungs. So it's a combination of food, water, and air passageway. It has 3 parts, as you know. I regret not putting these in a different order. Nasopharynx would be the most superior, then oropharynx, and then the laryngopharynx. They do contain skeletal muscles that you can control to allow for the swallowing action, the swallowing muscles. And then food will move by peristalsis, which we're going to talk about here. So this is what peristalsis looks like. It's a wave-like motion that moves material from one end to another by alternating the contractions. So here you have the muscles have contracted, forces the bolus, which is this yellow structure, downward, And then you can see further down, it contracts again, pushes the bolus further south, contracts again, pushes it even more, and now we're down into the stomach. So those contractions continue to push. It's like pushing from the end of a toothpaste bottle. We're going to compare that to what's called segmentation, which works a little bit differently in your intestines. But your pharynx and your esophagus work by peristalsis to move that bolus. Now, that's not a term that you may have heard before. I think I've used it a couple times this year, but a bolus is that, and this is kind of disgusting, this is that wet, mucousy ball of food, saliva, mucus. There are antibodies in there that come from your salivary glands, enzymes, if I didn't already say that, and that material then binds together. The mucus helps bind it, and that's why you swallow it as one unit. Okay, and that's what helps keep it together to force it all down at once. In the esophagus it doesn't really have much of a digestive function. It's just a passageway. It's a tube from pharynx to stomach. And starting here, we have 4 basic layers that go from the esophagus to the large intestine. They have all of the 4 same basic layers, starting with what's called the mucosa. The mucosa is the innermost lining of, and that's what your food is going to be coming in contact with as it passes through. The surface lining, and if you remember this from the unit earlier in the year on tissues, all linings are epithelial tissues in the body. So this lining is going to be made up of simple columnar epithelial tissue. Okay, in some spots it's going to be simple columnar. Actually, in the esophagus, it's going to be stratified squamous. Soon as you get to the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, all 3 of those are simple columnar. So sorry, I misspoke initially. The esophagus is going to be stratified squamous, and the rest of the alimentary canal, stomach, small, and large intestine are all simple columnar. Now, the stratified squamous in the esophagus allows it to resist friction. As you're swallowing foods, some things are going to be more abrasive than others, and this way if you do damage to a few of the surface cells, it's okay because they get replaced by cells underneath, and they continuously replace just like your skin does. It's the same tissue type that makes up your skin. The only difference in your skin is the stratified squamous in your skin also has keratin, which waterproofs you. Your esophagus isn't going to have that. The simple columnar is good at absorbing. If you remember, you have your basement membrane, and then you have these long, very tall, column-shaped cells. And these guys are really good at absorbing. Some of them will have cilia, not in the intestines or stomach. You'll see those in the respiratory tract. But here, they are very, very good at absorbing. The next layer down is going to be your submucosa. The submucosa has your blood vessels, nerve endings, lymph nodes, lymphatic vessels. It's a very, very highly vascular tissue layer, and that's going to be just deep to the mucosa. As you continue one more layer down, you've got the muscularis externa, which has 2 layers of smooth muscle that alternately contract, and when they do so, they push on the material in the opening that the food's going through to squeeze it down further and force it down the tube. And then on the outside, you have another layer of epithelial tissue that is the peritoneum, and that is another serous membrane. Pericardium surrounds the heart, pleura surrounds the lungs, surrounding your abdominal organs, and this tube is the peritoneum. It does have 2 layers. Visceral, remember viscer means organ, so visceral is going to be the layer that's closest to the organ, and then your parietal layer is going to be the layer that's just outside of that and actually lines the abdominal cavity, more specifically the entire abdominopelvic cavity. So here's a picture showing you what we're talking about, and it looks like there's a heck of a lot going on in this. Try to break it down for you. the very, very thin blue layer here on the outside, little thin blue line that you can see all the way around, that's your serosa, that's the peritoneum. That's the protective layer that reduces friction between your organs in your abdomen. Because not only do you have your small intestine, large intestine, stomach, you've got your liver, your gallbladder, your spleen, bladder. We have lots of other organs present in the abdomen that you don't want these guys to rub and break down. Okay, so you have that thin protective layer. Just deep to that, we've got, in here, let me change colors. We've got 2 layers. Here's one, and that goes all the way. Here, let's try that again. That's the edge of it. There's one layer. That's the other edge of it. And then deep to that, you've got the second layer of the muscle. And notice that some of the cells look like you're looking at them lengthwise. So this inner layer here, you're looking at the length of the cells. And then these guys, you're looking at them, the tips. Okay? So they're running lengthwise away from you. Those 2 layers are the muscularis externa. And when these guys contract, they push on the opening, and this is where the food's going to be going through. It's going to be passing through this tube. So when these layers out here contract, they're going to push on everything inside of them, including the submucosa and the mucosa. And that's going to make the size of this continue to narrow and get smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's going to push the material through the tube. Here is going to be your submucosa, and then the outer line, these epithelial cells that are going up and down and have, a wavy pattern there. Those are going to be, let's get this out of the way. These guys are the epithelial cells, and that's where the absorption is going to happen. Okay. Notice it says in the large intestine, it says no villi, and then in the small intestine, it says intestinal villi. The reason for that is it increases surface area in the small intestine. The small intestine needs those little extra projections here to increase the absorption power of the small intestine, because you're going to break down chemically and physically everything by the time it gets to the beginning of the small intestine. And to do that, or when that happens, we have to be able to absorb it here. Okay? Large intestine does some absorption too, but not to the capacity that your small intestine absorbs nutrients. You want to pull everything possible out of the foods that you've eaten so that you can nourish all your cells. So you're trying to get it into the bloodstream, and that's why we have this vascular layer here, the submucosa, which has all the blood vessels just underneath. Okay? And we are actually going to stop there. I'll separate this and do the second one on another video. I'm going to have questions that go along with that, so keep that in mind. And we will have a structural quiz that I'll post here soon as well, so you can do some practice. And then we need to make sure you know the basic structures of the digestive system. Okay, so enjoy. Have a good evening, and we'll talk to you soon.